Hey, in this video, we're going to take a look at a very unique product. This is maybe one of the most interesting power stations I have reviewed. And if you watched any of my previous stuff, you've probably heard me mention at some point that I'm mostly interested in reviewing power stations that have some differentiating feature rather than being the same exact feature set of something else that I've already reviewed, or worse, exactly the same thing with a different label. I don't want to waste your time with that. I don't want to waste my time with that. But in this case, imagine a power station, a Bluetooth speaker, and a guitar amp had a baby. I think you'd be pretty close to what this thing actually is. Who is it for? Is it a gimmick? Does it sound all right? Let's find out. All right, per usual, let's get this thing out of the box so we can start playing with it. Very well packed. All right, let's see what we got in this this box here. Doesn't feel like a lot. All right. This I was not expecting. It's a microphone, and a wireless microphone at that. And guess what? Two of them. So I'm guessing one of the use cases for this particular product is a karaoke machine. And it looks like they give you some AA batteries for that, for the wireless mics. There is a standard computer style AC cable, so that tells me there's probably not a charge brick with this, which is nice. And a car charger to an XT60 connector. So I'm guessing we should be able to charge this thing via solar also, but we'll find out. No solar cable in the box, but that's okay. One user manual and then a wireless mic instruction guide. I really didn't know about the wireless mic thing. That is something that caught me by surprise. Wow, okay. So in addition to basically a 1,000 watt power station here, you are looking at a portable sound system. As you can see over here, the sound system itself, the sound components are supplied by Harman Kardon, which, if you're familiar with the speaker industry or audio component industry, is a fairly well-known audio component manufacturer, and typically relatively high-end. So, really nice metal handles on this thing. It looks like the controls for all the audio stuff are on the top, as is a display, kind of the normal battery state of charge and all that. And looks like there's an instrument connection port here. It looks like maybe a 1/4 inch where you can connect a guitar. So this might actually function as an amp. Man, if only I knew anyone who had a bunch of musical instruments around. Anyway, so on this side we've got our XT connector. We're going to find out what kind of DC input this thing will let us have. There's our usual array of USB ports. So I'll have to detail that for you at some point here in a little bit. Car charger or car socket and an AC charging port. All right, on this side, all we've got are a couple of AC plugs, with the handle of 3-prong. These are not grounded plugs, obviously, but they give you a slot to accommodate the grounding prong. Then it looks like we have a little LED light on the back as well. All right, so let me go run this thing through the normal power station testing paces and find out how it performs. And then we're also going to have to test the audio output capability and find out how well that performs. So that'll be fun. That'll be a little bit unique. So I got some fun things in mind for that. All right, let's jump forward in time and see how all that went. And we're back. All right, it has actually been about 6 weeks, I think, since I did the introduction. So I've been playing around quite a bit with this thing. And let's get into some of the specifics, and then we'll talk about kind of who this thing is really for. And then I'm going to show you the test results, including the sound test, which you want to stay tuned for, because it's kind of amusing. And then I'll give you my final thoughts. All right, so let's jump into the specs itself. So first of all, let's talk about price. I don't know the pricing for this because this is actually not quite yet available. This is going to be on an Indiegogo campaign, and I'll put the links to both the Indiegogo campaign and also the UIBI or UIBI SoundPower website in the description below if you want to go get more information. So I don't know what it's going to cost just yet, but I'm sure there'll be more information on the Indiegogo campaign. And as is typical with these crowdfunded projects, they usually have early bird discounts if you are a supporter of the campaign. So go check that out if this thing is something that you might be interested in, which maybe you don't know yet, but by the end of the video, maybe you will. All right, so warranty. This has a 2-year warranty on it, which is fairly typical in this space. And from a battery chemistry standpoint, it's a LiFePO4 lithium iron phosphate. I don't recall seeing a particular life cycle rating, but I think we can assume that it's pretty typical in the 3,000 to 3,500 range, where you can expect to maintain at least 80% of the original capacity. That information may be up on their website and maybe I missed it. So if that's something you're concerned about, I'm sure you can find more information there. Now the AC inverter on the SoundPower 1200 is 1,200 watts, and it is that's continuous. The surge rating is 2,400 watts. And we're going to test that here when we get into it. Now, when you're charging this thing via AC, it does not have a charge brick. It's got the integrated AC adapter built in, and it'll charge at about 800 watts. That means that you can charge this thing from 0 to 100% in about an hour and a half, which is very good. Now, in terms of solar charging, the SoundPower 1200 has that XT60 connector on it. And in this particular pre-release version that I have, the solar charging is spec'd at 200 watts only. But I'm told by the UIBI guys that they are increasing that to 300 watts for the final version, and that will be spec'd at 36 volts at up to 8.5 amps. So that'll give you your 300 watts input. Now with a 300 watt input, if you multiply that by 5 or maybe even 5.5, that's kind of the multiplier I use to see if I put maximum solar output or maximum solar input on this, and that should give me about 1,500 watt hours of recharging capacity from 300 watts in a single day. And that should be more than enough to charge this thing from 0 all the way back to 100 in a single day of fairly decent sun. Now, UIBI claims that the SoundPower does have a UPS function in it, so we're going to test that in a minute. Now, in terms of output ports, it's got 2 AC outlets on it. It's got 2 USB-As. One, I think, is like a 22.5 watt, and one's a quick charge 3.0, which is about 18 watts. And then it's also got 2 Type-Cs, and one of them is a PD 100 watt, so that's very cool. And then the other one is a PD 30 watt, which is also pretty handy. Now there's also a couple of DC 5521 accessory ports on there, and then your typical car socket, the 12 volt, 10 amp car socket. All right, let's talk about the audio functions. I actually laid this thing on its face here so you can kind of see some of those controls. I'll kind of give you some close-ups of that. And like I said, we are going to test the audio function in real time here, so that's going to be fun. But it's got Bluetooth connection, so you can stream audio from any Bluetooth device like your phone or a tablet, and it includes pause, play, and next controls there on the bottom. And it'll accept up to 2 wireless mics, and they obviously give you those. I showed you those in the intro. Then it's got a 1/4 inch mono input on the top here. And that is, I think they typically promote that as a guitar. So it certainly works for a guitar, bass guitar, electric guitar. Could work for any instrument that has a 1/4 inch output, including like a drum machine or a sampler pad or anything like that. And again, we're gonna have a little fun with that in a bit. Then it's got a reverb effects button that you can dial on and off to, if you're using this like a karaoke machine or something like that, you can kind of add some reverb to make it more interesting. And then it's got a bass boost button. That has a little bit of a subtle bass boost contribution, but it is definitely noticeable. So if you want a little more kick, you press the bass boost and it'll give you a little more kick. And then it's got some sound synced lighting and that little ring that goes around the woofer in front of the speaker. So that's kind of fun. And there are multiple lighting modes there. So you can have it just static, and you have it kind of cycle through some different colors, and it'll kind of bounce around and do patterns if you wanted to do that when music is being played. All right, so who is this for? This SoundPower 1200 is really a unique power station. So obviously the usual power station kind of end user. So people looking to power 12 volt fridges. And by the way, I did do a 12 volt fridge test on this. It ran for over 24 hours, no problem, until I manually turned it off. So I don't think there's going to be an auto cutoff problem on this. Yeah, so definitely works for that particular use case. And then of course, all the other things you would typically use a power station for. And then one of the other things about this, especially the sound system part that I thought was pretty compelling, is that when I go camping, whether it's car camping or tent camping, as long as it's not backpacking, because this obviously is not something you're going to take backpacking. But a lot of times, the sun goes down, and you usually, you're in for the night pretty early, and so you typically like to stream movies and things like that. At least me and my wife do. And it's nice to have a little more than like tablet sound when you're streaming, episodes of The Mandalorian, for example. So this allows you to stream that audio soundtrack in big sound. Now it's not stereo, but it's fine in that kind of a use case. It's absolutely fine, and the sound quality is actually very good. You could obviously use this as kind of a mobile, self-contained, self-powered karaoke machine for parties, especially with those two microphones. And those two mics also give it kind of a unique application if you wanted to use this as a PA system for whether you're doing parties or large group meetings or things like that, especially if it's outside, for example, and you don't really have a convenient power source. It's all self-contained. And then if you happen to be a small venue musician or a street musician, you know, where you're doing like, what do they call that? Busking, I think. And if that's something that you're doing, you need an amp. You don't have a place to plug in. You don't want to carry around an extra battery. This is your amp and your battery all in one. Pretty damn convenient. All right, so let's get to the testing on this thing. So obviously I like to test no load draw to find out how much that inverter is going to consume if you leave it on by mistake and forget to turn it off. And what I found was that it consumes about 1.45% of the capacity for every hour that you leave the inverter on. So this is not a power station that you want to forget to turn the inverter off if you're not using it. Typical for most power stations, but there's not really an auto cutoff if the inverter is active or the DC outputs are active. It'll just stay on as long as you leave it on. And I did test the AC output voltage, and I'll run a clip of that here. And you can see here that I actually did get a full 120 out of the output ports on the AC side. So that's pretty good. And while this unit does have audible fans when you're charging or discharging near the max rate, and check it out, you can kind of hear it in this clip. As you can see, it comes in about 63 dBs at about 6 inches away. But I think it's kind of a reasonable white noise sound, so at least for me personally, I don't think it's something that I would find annoying in a tight, quiet space. And as per usual, I did test for actual usable capacity on both the AC and the DC side, as well as the inverter load. Can it handle 1200 watts continuous? And let's go see how those tests went. All right, let's do a DC discharge on this. I have it all powered up. Now this is a 12 volt 10 amp, so let me take it up to 10 amps, 10.1. Now we are reading a little bit low here at 11.4 volts. So we are below 12 volts. We're still within the normal spec, but it does not appear this is a regulated port. Still though, as long as we're not going to drop below 11 volts, we should be fine in terms of powering a DC fridge. Let's see what happens if I edge this past 12 or 10 amps here much further. It hasn't cut us off yet. The port is spec'd at 10 amps, but we're pulling 12.6. It does look like it's going to let us exceed that 10 amps for a reasonable period of time. But let me go ahead and dial that back down to the 10 amp spec. And we'll just let it run there. And we'll find out what kind of usable capacity we get out of this unit from the DC ports. And you can see here in the DC discharge capacity test, I was able to net about 971 watt hours out of 1,120 rated. So that's about 86.7% of rated capacity. And that's above average in my experience with power stations in this particular capacity class. All right, let's do an AC discharge test here. Go ahead, plug that in, turn on the AC. There we go. We'll be able to see the watts here. This will be in the upper 200s, and then it'll drop down and it'll be just a little over 200 watts. So that's a pretty consistent load for this. It's about a 0.25 C discharge rate. And we'll find out how many electrons we catch coming through the AC inverter. And then through the AC inverter, I was able to get a usable capacity of 919 watt hours. And again, out of 1,120 rated watt hours. So that's about 82% of rated capacity. And that's actually a pretty average number and not surprising considering that the no load draw is 1.45% per hour. All right, let's load test the inverter on this UIBI SoundPower 1200. So this is rated for 1,200 watts continuous, 2,400 watts surge or peak. And this particular space heater should run us past that 1,200 mark by at least a reasonable margin. And we're just going to see how the unit reacts to that. And I'm also going to set a timer and just kind of see how long it lets us run and see if it lets us run at least 15 minutes. So let's check that out. We are at 1,310 watts. So we're already above the rated 1200. It looks like we're settling down just a bit. So we're at 1260 watts. Let's just let that run and see if it cuts us off. Let's try letting that run and make sure it lets us run. That's about as close as I can get it to 1200 without going over. I'm going to start the timer. And we're going to let that run a while. Alright, we have hit 15 minutes and we are still cooking at just under 1100 watts. Let me take my oil heater up another notch, and it is going to very quickly jump past that 1200 watts continuous. Let's see how long it lets us run. Alright, so we immediately hit 1657. Okay, so it let us run almost exactly 1 minute before it shut us off. And we were at just over, what, 1600 watts, I believe? So this unit clearly does support 1200 watts continuous, and it will let you exceed that by a pretty fair margin for up to a minute, which does lead me to believe that it can handle a 2400 watt surge just momentarily, which is kind of how these things typically work. So I would say that is a successful test for this SoundPower 1200. All right, the SoundPower manual says that it has UPS capabilities, which means I should be able to run a computer off of this thing and have this plugged into the wall. And then if wall power suddenly goes out, or grid power goes out, it should automatically switch over and provide the laptop with battery power without interrupting the laptop's function under most circumstances. Now, they say you shouldn't use this with mission critical sensitive equipment, but it should work fine for most things. So we're going to test this. I've actually removed the battery from the laptop so it can't sustain itself if it loses power. So you'll notice if the power goes out, the screen will immediately shut down and it'll possibly reboot if it gets partially interrupted. So I have fully charged up the SoundPower. So it's basically sitting at 100% of power. And so the watt output right now says 0. So it is actually passing through the wall power, the AC input, to the laptop. So it's not providing that power via battery. So let's find out if the UPS function works by simulating a power outage by simply removing the battery power from the side here. So let's see what happens. All right, so I'm getting a watt input now registering on the display on the top. The laptop obviously did not shut down. And just to prove to you that this is actually connected to the battery, I have the AC output on this far side over here. So if I pull this plug, you can see the laptop immediately shuts down. So this thing definitely works as a UPS, at least for my little computer setup, and very cool. Okay, now obviously I had to test the sound on this thing. So I came up with an idea on how to go about doing that. And I convinced my wife to participate. And so let's go take a look and see how that went.
Stop that! You're not going into a song while I'm here.
All right, I hope you didn't actually think I was going to make you sit through a clip of me singing. Nobody needs to hear that. But in all seriousness, I was actually very impressed with the sound quality of this thing. Despite the fact that it's monophonic, as typical instrument amps are, it actually sounds quite good, and I was very impressed. All right, some final thoughts on the SoundPower 1200. If you've seen many of my other videos, at some point you've probably heard me talk about the fact that I really do appreciate it when a particular product is able to serve multiple functions, especially when you're traveling, you're RVing, you're camping. Multifunctional or multi-purpose things that you bring with you are very handy, and this is definitely one of those things. I really do like the fact that it's not only a very capable power station, but it's also a pretty good sound system on top of that. Whether you're just streaming movies from a tablet in your car when you're car camping or RVing, or if you need a fully self-contained, self-powered PA system. Just very cool functional device. So the Indiegogo campaign on this, I think, launches in early mid-March 2023. So depending on when you're watching this, this product may be available for purchase now, or it may be available as an early adopter, early supporter through their Indiegogo campaign. But again, I'll put all those links in the description below if you want to go check those out. I'm not commissioned on this in any way. I just thought this was something fascinating that you might want to know about. So if you found any of the information helpful, I'd appreciate a thumbs up on the video, and got some other cool stuff right around the corner, so stay tuned for that. In the meantime, thanks for sticking with me, and I do hope to see you in the next one. Until then, have fun out there.